Today in this video, I want to talk one more time about sleeves. Now, we already spoke about how to draft and how to sew different types of sleeves, but today let's focus on the cuffs. Now, the topic of the sleeves is just beautiful. I mean, it's wide, it's interesting, it adds so much personality to your garment. So today, we will be talking about cuffs, 5 different types and how to make them. And the first one is going to be the one that I'm wearing right now. It's easy, it's beautiful, and I bet that you will be able to do that without a problem. Because remember, if I can do it, then you can do it for sure. So let's get started. For that, of course, you're going to need a sleeve. The sleeve type for which usually you're going to be making cuffs like that is purposefully made wider at the wrist, so that way you can bring it in and create that beautiful gathered element. So definitely make sure to check out the tutorial about how to make different sleeves. I go over how to make a bishop sleeve or a bell sleeve that is wider at the wrist. Then of course you will need your elastic. This is 1/2 inch elastic. And here's a quick little tip regarding these sleeves. Usually what I like to do, I like to add 1 inch, about 1 inch, sometimes a little bit less, sometimes a little bit more depending on the fabric. So that way the sleeve has the ability to sort of roll over a little bit over that gathered element that we're going to be creating. And that definitely makes it a little bit nicer too. So take a look at that. You also want to make sure that you add necessary length to the hem of the sleeve. So if I turn this over, you will see that I have already pressed the hem of the sleeve, so the hem allowance. This is 1 inch, and as I mentioned, I'm going to be using 1/2 inch wide elastic. So 1/2 inch is going to give me enough room for the elastic to go through. Let me just show you how that's going to look like. So here's the elastic. And of course we need a little bit of wiggle room for the elastic as well. And the rest is going to be for the seam allowance that we're going to be pressing under. And that's exactly what is going to be our first step. I usually like to do these things while the sleeve is flat because that is the easiest way how to go about it. So when you're going to be working with your sleeve, first you're going to press it at 1 inch. So first you're going to press your entire hem allowance. And after that is done, I'm gonna go ahead and fold over, I would say about 1/4 inch. You can always double check by placing your elastic right over here and making sure that there's a little bit of wiggle room above it and below it as well. So let's go ahead and do that. Once this has been done, the next thing for me is actually to unfold everything that we have pressed, and then we're going to place the sleeve right sides together, and we're going to complete the sleeve seam. So from the armpit over here all the way to the hem, you're going to construct your sleeve with the seam allowance that you have and with a seam finishing technique of your choice. So from here till here. Once you have completed the sleeve seam, we're going to return back to the hem. So here we have that little pressed piece, pressed hem allowance. So go ahead and place it back like so with a seam allowance on the inside, and then flip it back one more time. There we go. And now we're going to stitch it down, leaving a small opening about 1 inch wide right away. I usually do that right over here on one or the other side of the sleeve seam, so it's your choice, but I usually try to do that on the bottom of the sleeve. The rest of it is going to be stitched down on the very edge right over here of this hem allowance that's been turned to the wrong side, just with a straight stitch from here all the way around, leaving 1 inch opening. Now here's that 1 inch opening that I have left for my elastic. Now go ahead and take your elastic, and you can secure a safety pin right over here or use any other tool, and place that elastic inside and go ahead and thread it all the way through this casing and out the same way as we started. Now usually I don't cut my elastic right away, I just work with a roll, because depending on the fabric, whether it's thinner or thicker, you might need a little bit more elastic or you might need a little bit less. So it just, I just prefer to work this way. Once that is complete, go ahead and snip the elastic. Obviously, try this on before you do that, so that way you are 100% sure that this is the width that you would like. Go ahead and overlap the ends of the elastic and just do a couple of times of a zigzag stitch back and forth, so that way you can secure the elastic. Now, while we're right here at the sewing machine, let's go ahead and pull the elastic in. And now this little bit, this 1 inch opening, let's just go ahead and close it with a straight stitch from the point where the opening starts to the point where the opening ends, and that's it. After that, just go ahead and tidy up all the loose threads, make sure that you secure everything, and your beautiful cuffs are done and ready. Now, wasn't that easy? I told you it's going to be really easy as 1, 2, 3. Now let's go ahead and take a look at this next one. This next one for sure is going to add a touch of personality to your sleeves and your garment, and it's a lot easier to do than it actually seems. We're going to start with a simple sleeve pattern, as you see, and as you can note from here, from the armhole all the way to the cuff, my sleeve is pretty much straight. You can also make it more voluminous if you would like to. And let me show you the difference between my actual wrist circumference and the width of the sleeve. You can see over here that the sleeve is much wider. So that's exactly what we want. Also, we want the sleeve to be a tiny bit longer than your usual sleeve, just because the technique that we're going to be using is going to pull it up a little bit. Therefore, we want a tiny bit of extra length. I usually add about an inch, maybe an inch and a half. Really depends on the fabric. Then what we're going to do is gonna take a ruler, and starting here at the bottom, I'm going to make straight lines about 1 inch apart each, and I will do 6 of them. You can do as many as you would like, and you can also space them according to your preference. After that, I'm going to finish the hem of the sleeve. I will be doing that with a rolled hem on my serger. However, you can do a rolled hem on a sewing machine, or you can finish it up with any other technique of your liking. Once the hem is done, here comes the fun part. First, we'll need to go ahead and grab an elastic thread that looks like this one. This is Gutermann threads, and it's really great because it comes in a couple of different colors. And you can pretty much get it in any sewing shop or on Amazon. I will leave the link for you guys in the info box below. After that, go ahead and grab your bobbin. Now we're going to be winding this thread by hand on your bobbin very carefully. Try to not to overstretch it at all. After that is done, insert your bobbin back into your bobbin casing like you would do with any other thread. Just know that this thread is a little bit thicker than your usual thread, so once you pull it through the tension discs of your bobbin casing, make sure that it actually does go through. Alright, let's adjust your stitch setting. Go ahead and make your stitch length a little bit longer. Usually mine is at 2.5, so I go all the way up to 4. Now we also need to adjust the tension on your sewing machine. I like to go to number 2, but every machine is different, so your numbers might be different. Just go ahead and play with it on your scrap piece of fabric before you get to the actual sleeve. Now comes the easiest part of them all. All we have to do is just straight stitches on top of the lines that we have marked earlier. Now after the first one, it might be a little bit difficult to do just because the fabric gathers up on the end, but that's all right. Just go ahead and very slightly straighten them out for the duration of your work at the sewing machine, and that should do the trick. Please know that here I am not backstitching at the beginning or the end of each of these straight lines, just because when the whole sleeve is done, I like to go ahead and tie these in the knots, and I will show you what I do in a little bit. Once all of the lines of the shirring are done, let's go ahead and take our sleeve, place it right sides together. We're going to align all of these lines so that way they're nice and neat. We're going to pin it together, and we're going to stitch the entire length of the sleeve from the hem all the way to the armhole. Here I start with a back stitch, and then I continue just with a straight stitch all the way through. Here's a quick note. This is how I like to go about this technique, but there are different ways how you can do this or that in sewing. It's definitely a creative endeavor, so find what works for you. Alright, once we have completed the straight stitch down the side seam of the sleeve, what I like to do is I like to put my hand through it, and I like to make sure that the tension is enough in these little elastic channels, and if it's not, I go ahead and I take one end of the elastic and I can pull on it a little bit and adjust that tension. And that's one of the reasons why I like to leave them as is before the sleeve is completed. Once I have made sure that this is indeed how I like it to be, I go ahead, take it off, and then I tie the knots between the elastics, and I also tie the knots between the regular thread. Once I have tidied up all of the loose threads of the elastic and regular thread, once everything is nice and neat, I go ahead and I finish up this seam with a serger. But I make sure that I disengage the knife so that way it doesn't cut away anything that has been tied in a knot. Now you can finish the seam in whichever way you prefer, but after that, your sleeve is done. Very fun, easy, comfortable, and definitely adds a bit of an interest to your garment. Now this next design idea is as simple as making a circle, but it looks really nice, and I'm telling you, it really is that easy. So let's go ahead and do that together. First, we want to take your basic sleeve, and if in previous two examples we made the sleeve wider, then right now we actually want to shorten it. The shortened amount of the sleeve is going to be the length of your cuff. Then we want to go ahead and draft a circle, or half the circle in my case. This part right over here is going to be the length of the cuff that we just spoke about. I have my sleeve that has been cut shorter right over here, so this is the hem of the sleeve. And I have my circle. It is easier if you cut your circle on the fold like I have done over here as well. So let me show you that. So this circle is cut on a fold on these parts. So if I open it up, it is going to be a full circle. Now, it's important to note that the circumference of this circle matches the width of our sleeve, but don't forget that here we also have the seam allowance, and of course we have the seam allowance on the hem, and we also have the seam allowance right over here. So the very first thing for us would be to sew the side seam of the sleeve. I'm going to do that just with a straight stitch without the finishing touches, since this is going to be just an example. But for you, I would do a straight stitch, and I would finish up either with a serger or with any other technique that you wish to finish your sleeve. Once we have sewn the side seam, we're going to attach the circle. What I like to do is I like to take the circle, fold it in half, and I like to make little notches over here, so that way I can line them up with this seam over here and with this little notch right over here. That just makes it easier. Let's go ahead and turn the sleeve right side out. Then we're going to take the circle, and first we're going to align this little notch that we just did with the side seam of the sleeve. And let's go ahead and press our seam allowances open. Put a little pin and continue the same way all the way around the circle. Once everything has been pinned together, let's go ahead and stitch it with a straight stitch on a sewing machine. Here, you might find it a little bit challenging to attach a circular cuff to the sleeve, especially if the sleeve opening is quite narrow. But here's an extra tip. It is an additional step, but I promise you it's going to help you in the long run. Go ahead and take a hand sewing needle and thread and baste the circular cuff to the sleeve by hand. That way, when you're feeding it through the sewing machine, you don't have to fiddle around with sharp pins, and it's so much smoother to push it through the sewing machine and get the job done. At this point, we're basically done. You will need to finish the seam that you just did with the choice of a finishing technique, and then of course you will need to hem the circular cuff as well. If I were you, I would go for a pinned hem or a rolled hem, and I will leave the tutorial for it for you guys in the info box below. But that's it, your circular cuff is done. Now right now I think is a really good time to remind you that a lot of these techniques can be applied to both short sleeve and long sleeve. So let's say I'm showing to you something on a long sleeve example. Think about it, can I apply this to the short sleeve as well? And how can I incorporate that into my next sewing project? So definitely look beyond what you see in a tutorial, not just in my tutorial, but just look beyond what you see in a design and think about the application in your particular project. This next sleeve cuff is really fun and can jazz up even the simplest of garments out there. Besides, you can use the same principle on both long sleeve and short sleeve, just like I mentioned before. So we're going to start with just a simple sleeve, very simple standard sleeve. Now, what I want to do first is I actually want to find the positioning of that little element that we're going to be creating. As you can see, I have marked here sort of like a long rectangle. So to find where to mark that, I'm gonna go ahead and place this side of the sleeve in and this side of the sleeve in quite evenly. There we go. And this is going to be my front side of the sleeve, so I'm going to go ahead and mark the positioning right over here. This channel over here is going to be 1 inch wide and about, let me tell you how long. For me, about 10 inches long, but of course, first we need to complete the hem. So this is going to be the first thing. I'm gonna go ahead, fold the hem for about 1 inch, and I'm going to stitch it down. Please remember that you will be completing the hem of your garment depending on what type of fabric you're using for this particular garment. Now I want to take my casing and I want to go ahead and serge the edges all the way around. Now when you're working with stretch fabric, in majority of the cases you won't need to do that because knit fabrics don't unravel. However, this one does, therefore I want to prevent that. So I'm going to go ahead and do that on the serger or all the way around. If you're working with woven fabrics, you can do the same. You can do a rolled hem on the edges, or you can simply go ahead and add a little bit extra on the sides, so that way you can go ahead and fold the seam allowances to the inside. Now that we have completed all of that, here's next and pretty much final step. Here's that little piece of casing that's gonna go right over here. I've serged the edges. I'm gonna go ahead and take one of the short ends and I'm gonna fold it over just by 1/4 inch or so. And then I'm going to place it a little bit away from the actual hem, just a tad bit away from it. There we go. And as you can see, I have decided to cut my casing a little bit shorter than the original 10 inches that I was thinking of. Now what we want to do is we actually want to do 3 stitches. One straight stitch here on the edge, another one right in the middle of the casing, and the third one again right on the edge, catching both the sleeve fabric and the fabric of the casing. And that's about it. For mine, I will be using a single needle and a chain stitch on my cover stitch machine. I'm going to start at the very bottom of the hem and will work my way up. First line is done. I hope that you can see it right over here. And then I'm gonna do another in the middle and another on the edge of this casing. And the distance between those lines is going to be equal. So that way it just looks really nice and neat. This is what it looks like when it's complete. You can see 3 lines. I have already tidied up all of the loose threads, so everything is nice and neat from both sides. Now, to achieve this result, all we have to do is to take a ribbon. In this case, I went ahead and I took a red ribbon just so that way you can actually see how it looks. But of course, you can make a matching ribbon. You can make your own from bias tape, whichever you prefer. So take a ribbon and we're gonna go ahead, place it in through here. It's gonna go all the way. And then here it's gonna loop and it's gonna come out through the other channel on the bottom. When you're ready to complete the side seam, undo the ruching like so, place the side seams together and sew them. Now let me show you how the sleeve actually looks on, and you will see the full garment with the sleeve in one of the next videos, so definitely stay tuned. Here you can see how I apply the same principle to the sleeveless top. The principle is the same, the execution is slightly different, and I think it will be interesting to see how it's done. So I will leave the link for that for you guys in the info box below. Now let's go ahead and move on to the next sleeve. This one is my favorite to use on short sleeve tops and especially t-shirts. Now this rolled sleeve cuff is assembled just like the ready-to-wear one you see on your right hand side. You can use your sewing machine, you can use your serger if you have one, but sewing machine will do just fine. You don't have to have any fancy equipment to replicate this awesome technique. Now the first thing that you're gonna do is you're gonna start by cutting your pattern pieces. If your t-shirt sleeve features a built-in hem, just go ahead and fold it onto itself and cut your sleeve without that hem. You will see why in just about a moment. Now it is time to cut your cuff. Now this ready-to-wear cuff is about 2.5 inches folded, which makes it about 6 inches unfolded, including the seam allowance. Mine is about 3 inches unfolded, which will make it about 1.5 inches folded in. Now you can make yours as wide as you want. I just did not want mine to be super bulky. The next thing you're gonna do is you're gonna cut your cuff and then you're gonna fold it onto itself very neatly, and then you're gonna place it on top of your sleeve. So now that it's pressed really nice and neatly, just place it on top of your sleeve, right sides together, and that's how you're going to sew it. Now that that is done, fold the cuff in half again, just like so. Slightly pinch it together to catch the fold on the seam. place the sleeve right sides together and serge. I know it is a lot of words and visual is so much better, so feel free to play this part a few times to ensure the correct assembly of your sleeve. Just make sure that everything lays nice and flat, and it will be quite a bit of layers to stitch through, but you can totally do it. If I can do it, you can do it. Just make sure that everything is folded onto itself just like you see on your screen. All right, you did it. Now what we need to do is we need to top stitch that itty bitty little part of hem where it was folded onto itself, because that is a bulky seam and we just need to make sure it lies flat and neat. Now take that tail of a serger thread, pull it back and fold that seam onto it, so that way it is really nice and secure. And you're gonna top stitch just with a simple straight stitch on a sewing machine, back and forth a couple of times, and that should do it. Now after that, to make it super nice and neat, what you're gonna do is you're gonna pull those threads backwards onto the wrong side of your project, and you're gonna tie a knot. That will leave it super nice and neat finish, and no loose threads are gonna be hanging. As the final part of the project, we need to place small security stitches onto your rolled hem, so that way they will hold it in place during wear, during wash time, and it will look nice and neat. There is 3 of them in total. One aligns with the shoulder seam and the other ones go in the middle. Mark them with your pins, and again sew back and forth a couple of times, pull threads backwards, tie them in a knot, cut them for a really nice neat finish. Go ahead and click on the video right over here. It's an interesting conversation about the standard seam allowance, or what's considered standard, and why I don't use that most of the times, and really good reasonings behind it. So definitely click right over here. I'll see you there, and until next time, happy, thoughtful sewing. Thank you so much for being here. Bye!